Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Craig Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as this is another one of our conference preview podcasts. Today we're looking at the SOCON, as this is a fun conference, a little bit of a new look conference, as Tennessee Tech now joins the fold. We'll be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Blake Lovell, who does amazing work over at Southeastern 16, and hey, he's out there in the great state of Tennessee, and we're going to chat with him about all 11 of these teams. We're going to be taking a look at the rosters, the nooks and crannies of it all, and the roster changes that we've seen there. In segment number 1, I'm going to get you guys the betting trends that we've got here in this fine conference, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the SOCON. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have 1 or 2 ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LRCM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Very much do beg with you, plead with you, send in these Twitter/X questions, because it is a long and winding off season. I want to be able to make sure that I know what I need to provide to make this the greatest college basketball season of all time. So always do appreciate you guys sending in those questions, and this will be a standalone podcast, so anything that I miss in college basketball on Thursday, I will polish that up tomorrow, because whether you're listening to this in late August, September, October, I want to make sure that you've got good evergreen information to get you set for the upcoming college basketball season. I do want to give these conferences, especially the smaller ones, as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible. So let's dive in on a SOCON where offense very much reigns supreme in this conference. You don't have a lot of great defensive teams, and one forte of this conference, a lot of teams that do a great job in terms of taking care of the ball. Wofford in season number 1 under Kevin Glittner, they really surprised people. They were second in the conference, 14th in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Most efficient team was Samford. Samford, they only turned the ball over on 13.1% of possessions last year. That was a top 11 mark in all of college basketball, so they really did a good job there. Now from there, you're going to see a little bit of a fall off with a team like in East Tennessee State. They were more around about 81st in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. Even VMI, for as rough a season they had, they only won 1 game within the conference, 83rd in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Now the Citadel, they were rough on offense, they were rough on defense, but even they, 155th in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. One team that's really had a tough time taking care of the ball over the last few seasons has been Western Carolina, 184th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. UNC Greensboro, they did a nice job taking care of the ball. They were 66th in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Mercer was 69th, and Chattanooga, even for as down of a year as they had, they were still 41st in the country with this regard. So just top to bottom, all these teams doing a really good job in terms of taking care of the ball. Now, with regards to the three-point shooting, can be a little bit more hit or miss in this conference. Like Chattanooga always loves a bomb it from 3. Due to injuries, they were down to about 116th last year with their three-point shooting percentage at 35%. Wofford, 119th. They were right around about 35% from three-point range last season. For East Tennessee State, they were probably the most balanced team in the conference, but even they were about 131st in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage at about 34.7%. And Furman, really good with regards to their two-point shooting. More on 204th with their three-point shooting percentage at 33.4%. And then you had Mercer, who was a little bit of an up-and-down team. They were a bunch of last year. They shot 35.6% from 3, over 40% at home, less than 32% away from home. That was 87th in all of college basketball. And for UNC Greensboro under Mike Jones, you ask who, and I say Coach Mike Jones, they were shooting about 35.6% from three-point range as well. So relatively good shooting teams, but again, the defense in this conference was not really there for a lot of these teams. UNC Greensboro was 349th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and that's not even the worst defense. Worst was VMI. Out of 365 Division I teams, 361st with regards to points allowed on a per possession basis. The Citadel was 356th, so and you have 3 of your bottom 25 teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis in all of college basketball right there. And then Chattanooga, they make it 4 out of the bottom 35, as they were 335th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, did have a few teams that were able to step up. East Tennessee was really the main of them. They were 87th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Always a very rock-solid defense. For Furman, they represented the conference in the NCAA tournament last year. not amazing on defense, but still not awful. 165th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Then you had Mercer, who was solid on offense, but 272nd in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You've got a bunch in Wofford that they were in all sorts of transition last year, 317th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, your newcomer, Tennessee Tech, going to be interesting to see how they do, because this is going to be season number 1 for them, and for Tennessee Tech, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they were one of the most dreadful groups in all of college basketball, 248th. And Tennessee Tech, they're not necessarily a team that fits the mold of a lot of these other teams out there in the SOCON, because I was mentioning how a lot of these teams, they do such a great job in terms of taking care of the ball, what have you. Tennessee Tech, they were 326th in the country last year in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on the offensive side of things. And a lot of these teams, even though they are very good offensive teams, they're not necessarily fast teams. Western Carolina is a team that has been bumping up their tempo a little bit more, up to 157th in terms of total possessions per game. Tennessee Tech, more of a neither here nor there team. They were 227th last year in terms of total possessions per game. You get down towards the bottom of the fold, and you do have a lot of teams that they were really looking to slow it down. They weren't like bottom 10 in the country slow or anything like that, but you know that East Tennessee is always going to be taking their time on offense. Last year, they clocked in at 286th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Furman is typically a team that likes to gun it a little bit more, and even they dialed it back a bit. They were more around about 271st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And then you've got Samford, who they were a very efficient team, and they underwent a coaching change with Lenny Acuff taking over, and they were up to about 171st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. UNC Greensboro was actually up to 173rd, so we saw some of these teams crank it up a little bit more. Chattanooga is always a team that, even though they've got good offense, they're never really a super fast team, 266th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And then the Citadel, always a very slow team, 314th in terms of total possessions per game out of necessity. VMI, they were about 242nd in terms of total possessions per game. And Mercer, another team that they typically like to gun it just a little bit more. They were up to about 145th in terms of total possessions per game, and that leads to some very interesting results with regards to the totals, because you always notice in the SOCON tournament when the games really ratchet up in terms of overall importance and the defense is better, that you're able to get quite a few unders there. But I mean, this is a conference that does have a lot of teams that go over. Like your top under teams were VMI, Mercer, and Furman, the only 3 teams that had more than 50% of their games go under. And for VMI and Mercer, 15 unders to 14 overs. So not like it was a big split there. And then Furman, 16 unders, 15 overs, and a push. Yeah, the Citadel be 50-50, 15 and 15 with regards to overs and unders. UNC Greensboro, 22 overs to 10 unders last season. Samford, 18 overs to 11 unders with a push. The Chattanooga Mocs were 16 overs to 13 unders. From there, I mean, it's 16 overs, 14 unders for Wofford. East Tennessee State, 17 overs, 15 unders. Western Carolina, 15 overs to 14 unders. Not a lot of like demonstrative splits, but as you can tell, teams are really looking to crank it up. And for UNC Greensboro, they were actually your 5th best over team in all of college basketball last season. So that's how good they were on the national landscape in comparison to other teams in terms of hitting the over. And then with regards to the betting trends, you only had 2 teams be above 50% against the spread. Wofford and the Citadel, they were both 15 and 15 against the spread. Now Mercer was a cash cow, 19 and 10 against the spread, one of the better marks in all of college basketball. And Samford, 17, 12, and 1 against the spread. But I mean, VMI dealt with so many injuries last year. They were one of your least profitable teams in all of college basketball. 9 and 20 against the spread. The rest of the teams were not profitable, but it wasn't bad. Like Western Carolina, 14 and 15 against the spread. Furman was 15 and 17 against the spread. East Tennessee State, UNC Greensboro, both 14 and 18 against the spread. And then Chattanooga, they were 12 and 17 against the spread themselves. And you take a look at the home and road splits, because you don't necessarily have like super inclement travel or anything like that. And these teams were not too bad when they were away from home, aside from Western Carolina, 5 and 11 against the spread away from home. And then UNC Greensboro, 5 and 8 against the spread away from home. East Tennessee State was 6 and 8. And then you had all 3 of these teams at 7 and 8 against the spread away from home. Chattanooga, the Citadel, VMI. Mercer was 10 and 6 against the spread away from home. Furman was 7 and 5, 9 and 7 for Wofford, and then 7 and 1 for Sam Amford. And the biggest thing that I really noticed is that maybe it's because of the lack of defense, what have you. These teams really struggled as underdogs. Mercer was good as an underdog, 7-3 against the spread, and then Chattanooga 7-5 against the spread as a underdog, but these were the lone two teams that were above 50% there. Furman was a just break even 5-5, and then the Citadel 14-15 against the spread as an underdog. UNC Greensboro 11-12 against the spread as an underdog. Then from there, Sanford 6-7 as a dog, 5-6 for Wofford. Western Carolina was 8-10. East Tennessee State was 2-3, and then 8-18 for VMI. That was a little bit less than tremendous, to say the least. And you just take a look at the non-conference for this conference, and it was just rough. Mercer was 8-2 against the spread in non-con play. East Tennessee State, they were 6-5, and same goes for Wofford. But then you had Furman go 5-6, 4-6, and 4-6-1 for Chattanooga, Sanford, and VMI outside the conference. Citadel was 3-7, UNC Greensboro was 3-8, and then 2-7 against the spread outside the conference for Western Carolina. So it was a little bit of a rough year last year for the SOCON. And if you're wondering, our newcomer in Tennessee Tech, they were a team that in non-conference play last year actually went 5-3 against the spread, and overall for Tennessee Tech against the spread, they were a team that was neither here nor there. They were 14-14 against the spread, and with regards to how they were playing with regards to totals, 14 overs to 14 under. So very much a break-even team there. And coming in next, we're going to be taking a look at the nooks and crannies of this conference. We're going to be diving in on all these rosters, the coaching changes, what have you, with our good friend Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, with myself, Craig Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast, the SOCON Conference Preview Edition. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is a Southern Conference preview podcast, and to preview the SOCON with me, he's done so for many years. It's Blake Lovell. He's out there in the great state of Tennessee. He does an amazing job over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he's dialed in on a little bit of everything. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell all together. And Blake, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks always for having me, Greg.
Always great to have you aboard. And Blake, we've got ourselves just a lot to be taking a look at in general with this conference. So how about if we do dive in first things first and we take a look at the newest member, Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech, I think, is a very fascinating team, which they bring in a new coach in Tobin Anderson. I think that he's going to be able to do some good things with this team in general. And it's obviously been shaky for them the last few years. But how do you take a look at a team that they're going to be bringing in a lot of transfers, but they actually do maintain a few guys from last season as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, right? We've said sort of just continuity and trying to figure out exactly what you can do with that, especially in this era. But I thought the hire, was one that certainly, you look at a Tennessee Tech program that felt like it just really just sort of hit a wall and it could not really sort of move further. And now you bring in someone who obviously has had some pretty historic, wins throughout his career. And, you're just really trying to rejuvenate the program, especially now as you get ready to head into a new conference. So yeah, I mean, I do kind of look at it and feel like, all right, this may be a team that with some returners, with some nice pieces, I think they added to the mix. And we always say, especially when you're talking about teams like this, obviously there are some challenges when it comes to being able to either bring in or retain some of your talent. But I think for the most part, this does feel like kind of a team that's going to be interesting to watch just because you feel like they're going to have a bit of a new style, a new approach, and that may be something that ultimately benefits them here.
Yep, I am right there with you. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to be taking a look at this conference in general. And then additionally, when it comes to this conference, we've got a few teams that are out there in obviously the state of Tennessee. And for Chattanooga, they're always a team that has really good offense. Defense last year was very, very shaky, but I mean, they were dealing with a lot of injuries last year. Getting back Sean Cusano, I think, is going to be big for them. I just trust in the Coach Earl style in general. I know that both he and his brother are over there at William & Mary, always have a style of just bombing from three, and I think Tyler Hauser is going to be a great ad for this team.
Yeah, I like the roster. There's not much to really, I feel like, to be down on all that much. Again, we always kind of talk about it. You're really trying to sort of, again, looking at a program that has had a lot of success. And for them, we know it was very disappointing in terms of how last year went compared to having the 29-win season the year before. And so you do feel like kind of with maybe some of these sort of roster addressing some of these, particular spots and feeling pretty good about where you are with that. I think with some of the transfers that they brought in, it does feel like a team that feels like it's going to take that jump. I don't think you're going to see them, tied there for second to bottom in the SOCON or anything like that. I do think they're going to certainly make some movements. And like you mentioned, we always say it is just trying to figure out if you can have kind of a distinct style and know exactly what you're going to get out of that. And, you do expect them to shoot a few shots from the outside. I would think that's pretty much a safe bet based on, Dan Earl's kind of strategy. So yeah, Chattanooga will be one of the more interesting teams, I think, in this league this year, because they are coming off a year where it was pretty disappointing based on the follow-up to that 29-win season, and just seeing if they finally kind of have the pieces in place to get back towards that.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at one of the other teams out there in the great state of Tennessee. How about East Tennessee State? I feel like you know what you're going to get out of this Brooks Savage coach team. It's always going to be a good defensive team. They're always going to be solid down low. They do have to replace a lot of those pieces like Blake Barkley and company from a season ago, but I like what they have coming in. Trevor Henning over at Weber State was a 10-point per game guy. Jaden Cooper was rock solid over at South Alabama. Mekhi Johnson, I like what he's able to bring to the table, and they bring back Jordan McCollum and a few of the other ancillary guys, bringing Crump from a season ago. And for East Tennessee State, I don't know if they win the league or anything like that, but again, I just feel very safe about this team being right there in the top two, top three of the conference once again.
Yeah, you do feel like they've kind of got that floor that is much higher than quite a few teams in this conference. And I think that's just, based on recent history. You look at the past couple of years, they go combined 25-11, of course, 13-5, last year, to be able to sit there at the top. And, I think that is something where, you kind of look at, we obviously had a really good regular season, come up short, and then that last game for the chance to get to the tournament. But you are able to look at the pieces they put together also. We always say chemistry can't really ever necessarily predict that fully, but I do think at least if you just kind of put the skill positions together and you see kind of what they have with this group, it does feel like, it's somewhat of an older group here. You look at how much kind of basketball these guys have played. Brooks Savage kind of does have an idea of how they want to play. I think East Tennessee State should, like you said, at worst, when I was going through and kind of comparing them to the other teams, I think at worst, you're probably talking about, the third best team in the league.
Yep, I'm right there with you, as we do have our good friend Blake Lovell, who does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And when it comes to teams outside the great state of Tennessee, this one I think is going to be a fun one. We both know Lenny Acuff from his days over there with Lipscomb, what have you. It's season number 2 for him over at Samford. And you lose Jaden Booth from a season ago, but bringing back the Norris brothers, who were the heart and soul of that backcourt. They did such a good job of being able to take care of the ball. That's big. You bring in a guy in Ty Davis, who was honestly okay in a small sample size. So Creighton with a little bit of Nashville flair. Win Miller, he comes over from Belmont. Dijon Humphrey is a nice three-point shooter. Samford had a solid year last year in year number 1 under Lenny Acuff. Felt like it got better as the season went along. I think this could be a year here in year number 2 where they take a nice stride forward.
Yeah, I mean, it is one where, again, you talk about just the benefit of the doubt that you give someone. And I think with Lenny Acuff, that's kind of where you stand at this point. When you look at the body of work that this guy has put together, had a couple rough years maybe early on there at Lipscomb, but now if you trace it back to the past 4 years now, I mean, his teams have won double-digit conference games, for 4 straight seasons. Of course, they went 11-7 last year. That was coming off that NCAA tournament appearance for him at Lipscomb the year before. So, we know, again, what Bucky McMillan was able to accomplish here with Samford. I think Lenny Acuff, those offensive, elements we've always talked about with him, you feel pretty good about sort of them being a very efficient offensive team, even if last year, I think statistically, in a couple areas, they weren't quite what you expected them to be. But I would expect with the team, that they have put together here and some of these key returners who always say retention's tough. They have brought back some key pieces of the puzzle here. And yes, everyone's going to be asking the same question about how you replace someone like Jaden Booth, just because of the numbers this guy put up, 22 points a game. But I think overall, again, we talk about floors, and that's what I think I always look at in these kind of conferences. There may be some teams that you're not sure if they're going to be able to finish 1, 2, 3 or whatever, but they don't have kind of that unpredictability that some of these other teams that have just completely shifted their rosters have. And again, Samford feels like they've got a pretty safe floor here and should be, I think, without question, competing for the league title.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I like what I'm seeing out of the Samford team, and I do think that Samford, they're going to be rock solid here for this upcoming season, and this is a team that's having a nice little bit of a come up as well. How about Western Carolina? They, in year number 1, were really shaky. Year number 2 under Tim Kraft, not to say that they lit the world on fire, but they were one of the better low-post teams in the conference. They certainly need to fix the turnover issues, but they bring in Malachi Brown, double-figure score from Georgia State. Jackson Prunty, I felt like should have gotten a little bit more run over at Charleston. And retaining Samuel Data, I don't know if it's Data or Data, but I do know that he gave the team 7.6 rebounds per game as a freshman. He's back. That's huge. And then Isaiah Manning from Sam Houston, a double-figure score out there in Conference USA. I think things are looking very good for Western Carolina right now.
Yeah, I think so too. Again, they're one of those teams that was kind of in the middle of the pack last year and, had a very strong finish to the season. Like that was sort of the big talking point, was that team at one point won 6 in a row. Counting the conference tournament game, came up just short against ETSU. I think it was in the semifinals. And so, yeah, you would think that, looking at where Tim Kraft has this team after really struggling in year 1, then turning things around to kind of have the year they had, and now feeling like, all right, we kind of got the strategy, the system in place. We kind of know what our philosophy needs to be successful. And you mentioned having a key returner always helps there when you bring back your best rebounder, and now, are able to pair him with some really good incoming players. So, yeah, Western Carolina, another team that and again, that's kind of a theme here is I think, you're looking at a SOCON that, yes, has been a very sort of popular, mid-major league in college basketball, and rightfully so. Even if there are some changing parts, I think you're still looking at some teams here that can compete at the top. And, that's the thing, right? You look back last year, Western Carolina was one of those teams where you kind of looked at, all right, where did they finish? Well, maybe they were the 6th best team in the league in terms of standings, but, there's only 3 games basically that separate them from the top and 2 games that separates them from being the 2nd best team in the conference. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're talking about these SOCON teams, because there wasn't a lot of sort of divide last year. Really, you could honestly say from 1 through anyone not named BMI, there was a lot of, again, pretty competitive teams. And so I think from that standpoint, once again, it should be the case, and Western Carolina should be right in there.
Yep, and you mentioned VMI. They went 1-17 in the conference last year. That was not great, to say the least. The Ricky Bradley injury, in their defense, that absolutely destroyed them. Not looking great, to say the least. So they do bring back their top scorer from a season ago, as you were able to have TJ Johnson give you 18 points per game. Cal Liston, they bring back a few guys, and I don't think that they're going to be 1-17 in the conference bad, but even with returning some of these guys like AJ Clark, in the day of NIL and being a military institute, we'll get to the Citadel in a second. These two programs are really fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, it's tough. You're just not in that same position when it comes to just maybe building your roster in the same way. And so, obviously this is a roster. We talk about retention. There are a lot of returners, and, that's kind of what you expect. And so being able to have a TJ Johnson leading the way, just because, he was someone who averaged 18 points a game, and how do you now develop into that next season? He's probably a guy that you're hoping, can maybe average more like 20 and 9 or something this year. And maybe that's kind of how it goes. But, he talked about it. Injury really was a big problem last year, but I am somewhat intrigued. Like you said, I don't think they're going 1 in whatever in the league this year. They're going to win more games than that, I would expect. But really, it's all about the development process and seeing how this team just develops as a whole. Defensively, they were just downright bad last year. There's no other way to put it, right? They've got to obviously be much better there if they're going to be competitive. They can't be giving up 80-something, 90 points a game and feel like they're going to win, because, the offense just wasn't there last year. I would think it'll be better this year, but not to the level to where they're going to be able to, again, just give up points at such a frequency that they did last year. So I think BMI will be better But again, we just talked about it, right? Look at all these teams we mentioned so far. There's a lot of these teams that you feel like has a pretty decent floor here. And this is a team that I just don't think, from a predictability standpoint, you're going to put on that same level.
Yeah, and you're not going to be doing that for the Citadel either. Again, I think that the Citadel might be actually a little bit better this year. Carter Kingsbury is back, 8 points, 4 rebounds per game, and they actually brought in guys via the transfer portal. Joe Hulbert, who he was over at Davidson, he was in a small sample size, able to give the team like 3.5 rebounds per game. Eddie Bronson, he was over at Furman, and he gave that team 5.5 points per game. Tyler Muris was actually good over at Idaho a few years ago. So the Citadel, they bring in some fresh guys. Again, Ed Conroy fighting an uphill battle, but I feel a little bit better about the Citadel team rather than VMI because at the very least, we've got some proven Division I production out of a few of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, again, they won 7 conference games last year. The record's not going to really jump out at people, 11-22, but they did find a way to win 7 of those. And Ed Conroy, obviously someone who's been around the block for many years and understands the challenges. But let's also remember they had a 7-win improvement. I said they won 7 games in the league last year. That was a 7-win improvement from the year before. When they went 0-18. So at least maybe there is some possibility there that you take some things from last year and you kind of apply them here. But I do look at probably what is going to be their projected starting lineup where you're going to have 4 new guys in the mix. And we always say it just kind of depends on how that chemistry comes together. You do have some proven talent there to kind of lead the way. But, overall, it is a team that I think it's sort of probably more so wait and see on how things unfold for the Citadel, because I think about it too, right? Like last year, they were a team that did not feel like they were that far off. You look at kind of the stats and everything. They lost, some pretty close games. They won some close games. It was kind of a year where a couple bounces go your way. Maybe we're talking about a team that finishes 10-8 and has a little bit more momentum coming into this season. But for now, again, I kind of probably slot some other teams above this one right now.
Yeah, no question about it. I do so as well. And when it comes to this team, it's a lot of moving parts as well. As Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, he's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for the SOCON Conference Preview Podcast. And when it comes to UNC Greensboro, I love Mike Jones as coach. You're going to ask who? I say Mike Jones. I always love making that joke. But for UNC Greensboro, for the second straight year, they lose 99% of their scoring production. Now, I love the fact that they bring in Braxton Stacker. He was great over at Southeast Missouri State, 12 points per contest. RJ Greer, small sample size over at Davidson. He was a 43% three-point shooter, but for Greensboro, over the last few years, they've become much more reliant upon three-point shooting. Last year was just not what you'd expect from a Mike Jones coach team in terms of defense. And with all the turnover, I just don't know how much better the defense is going to get, which means I have to default to them being more towards the bottom half of the conference.
Yeah, it was one of his more average offensive team, but it was probably his worst defensive team he's had, as a head coach, if you trace back through all the efficiency rankings and everything. Like this was easily, from that standpoint, his worst defensive team. He had one, I think in 2014 at Radford that was pretty poor, but they were 22-13, 10-6 that year, 15-19 last season, 9-9. And that's where, we probably said this last year in the preview. We were like, hey, if there's one thing you can count on is that this team being pretty consistent and probably finding a way to get to 20 wins and probably at least 12 in the conference. And that just didn't happen last year because, like you said, the defense took a big step back and, just did not. They couldn't force turnovers. Like teams just kind of did whatever they wanted. They shot the three well against them. You better believe they're going to have to get better there. And I think, like you said, bringing in someone like Braxton Stacker from SEMO and kind of what he brings to the table, the other guys as well. They've got some size on this group. I like that. They've got kind of, guards that are 6'3". We've got some guys in the front court, 6'9", 6'10". So I'm curious to see kind of how that plays out in terms of how they approach things. But yeah, I think overall, like it's going to be kind of curious to see, what this team can do now when you look at UNC Greensboro and try to feel like, all right, this is something where you're trying to figure out exactly what you do in this new era, under Jared Hass. And because again, it just felt like the Mike Jones era just was not what we were expecting in terms of that grand finale. But, different things and all that, like maybe they can turn things around.
Yep, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens with them because they're one of the biggest question marks in this conference without question. And when it comes to this team, I do think that they're going to be right there towards the top once again. And that would be Furman, who went to the NCAA tournament last year. They were just 10-8 within the conference, and they do have to replace a big-time producer in Alex Wilkins. But I still have a lot of faith in this team because they do bring back one of the Bowsers from last year. You lose Cooper Bowser, but you retain Cole Bowser. They did a pretty solid job in terms of revamping this team via the transfer portal, as well as I do think that Marcus Kelly coming over from Western Carolina, he averaged 13.5 points per game within the conference. That's such a good add. And then Jordan Butler, the 7-footer from South Carolina, I think is an elevator for a team that is always so efficient with their interior offense under Coach Richie.
We've seen Jordan Butler, and when you have a guy that's 7 foot, 240, whatever he is, like that can obviously be a significant separator in this league. And so I am kind of fascinated to see sort of the role that he plays. This is an older team in terms of the guys that are going to lead the way when you do kind of look at what you expect their starting lineup to be. And so I do look at it overall and feel like, this is a Furman team. And you mentioned the very last thing you said, it's Bob Ritchie, right? I mean, this is a guy that we've seen have so much success and still kind of this long running trend where they've not won fewer than 10 conference games since he's been at Furman. And so you just fully expect them to be right there in the title race. I wouldn't be surprised if they find their way back to the NCAA tournament again, just because it is something where you can kind of project they're going to be a very good offensive team. You'd be surprised if they're not, just the way they run their stuff. There are not a lot of teams, I think, at the mid-major level that are as sort of smooth in terms of being able just to execute the way they do offensively, and even with some new pieces in the fold. Again, Bob Ritchie knows what he's looking for. He knows what he needs kind of to be able to, to run his stuff from a point guard, from guys on the wing, and how that's going to affect the front court play. I'm pretty fascinated by this team.
Yep, I am as well. And when it comes to this team, they were second in the conference last year. You would not have thought that to be possible because Wofford, they have that late coaching change. But somehow, some way, these guys were able to pull it together. Kevin Glitner, he proved himself to be a really good coach, but now you have to lose Kamari Holmes, now Malchowski. Those two guys were combining for about 36 points per game. Now the guys like Chance Watley, Luke Flynn, the ancillary guys are going to be back. And the 7-footer from the Division II ranks, Evan Ramsey, looks like he's going to be a beast down low. But that said, losing your top two scorers for a Wofford team that you mentioned it within this conference, like the margins were so slim, I do think that there might be a little bit of negative regression for them this year.
Yeah, they're probably maybe the most intriguing team for me, because I do kind of look at, again, Kevin Glitner coming in, and obviously, again, we kind of know the situation where he took over, and it was just kind of curious to see how it would all play out. And certainly, offensively, they were a pretty good team, and they were fun to watch at times, when you did kind of watch them play in some of these games. And I think it is one where, like you mentioned, they've obviously brought in some size when it comes to having someone like Ramsey in the mix. Again, I think you've got some decent depth there in the backcourt. I think the front court, to me, is going to be the most curious aspect I have for them, just seeing exactly what kind of lineups they're going to sport. Because, I think you look at Ramsey, the next tallest guy, they got a couple 6'9" guys, but that's about it in terms of like just truly your big sort of front court. They got a lot of guards on the roster. So I'm curious to see how they play. Maybe they go a little bit more up tempo, those kind of things. Another team where the defensive numbers just were not that great last year. So if you are going to take that next step, get out of that sort of middle of the pack that is just very crowded, I think that's certainly an area where they're going to have to be better.
Yep, and then this one I think is so fascinating because I absolutely love Ryan Ritter as a coach for Mercer. They were very much home merchants last year. They were amazing at home. Away from home, yeah, they need to straighten that out a little bit. And they were killed on the defensive glass, gave themselves a lot of second and third chances. Brody Shoulders is back. Quentin Perkins, he's back as well. And then they had a few guys like Derek Goodman, who he was a good man at the non-Division I rank in terms of being able to pop it from three. Want to get your thoughts on Mercer because they didn't necessarily blow you away when they were away from them, but they had that great home court advantage. And this is a team that I just believe in Ryan Ritter, but at the same time, too, I'm not necessarily blown away by the roster right now either.
Yeah, I think it's a roster with something to prove. Because, again, you said the good last year, they had the bad last year where we watched them go on the road, and there were games like the Sanford one where you put up 49 points. And, again, you're looking at situations like that. And so being able to, to find a way to go on the road, win those kind of games, that's obviously going to be crucial for them. They've got an older roster, but I don't think by any means like it's one of the oldest rosters in this league. I mean, what does that even mean anymore, Greg? We don't know how old. There's some guys playing, I feel like we've been playing for 20 years at this point. So, I think it's going to be interesting because Ryan Ritter, able to kind of turn things around. We know kind of the success he had at UT Martin. Then he goes in that first year at Mercer, a bit of a struggle, but they turned it around last year. And maybe some of that familiarity now with the conference after a couple of years, kind of recognizing what you need to be able to take that next step. And again, get out of that jumbled 11-7 type pack. I think Mercer is right there with a chance. I may be a little bit more confident about, an East Tennessee State, a Samford, Furman, teams like that. But I don't think there's any question that Mercer, has the ability to be right there in the mix.
Yeah, and you mentioned guys playing for a long time. UNC Greensboro had on their roster, I think last year, Antoine Jones. He was so old that he was on the roster of Danny Hurley in his first year at UConn. A part of the, I believe it was Zion Williamson recruiting class. Like, that's how old some of these guys are in college basketball. So nothing like some good, clean family fun there. And hey, who knows? Maybe the preview that we just did will now have a whole bunch of fifth-year guys that they just have the Citadel going to number one in the conference. But that said, my friend Blake, you're doing such an amazing job looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. You're dialed in on Southeastern 16. I mentioned it with these random wild court cases. You're doing a great job taking a look at that and so much more. So love the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can check out all of our SEC stuff, of course, over at Southeastern 16, and everything college basketball related. You can find me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake doing such an incredible job looking at this great game of basketball every single time he joins me. Learn such great insights. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, it is the SOCON Conference Preview Edition. So I give you my protector of finish for the SOCON. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to be joined by Blake Lovell. He has joined me for this conference preview many, many times. Every single time he does so, always delivers such great insights. He's over there at Southeastern 16, holding it down out there in the great state of Tennessee. Every single time he joins me, he does lend such great insights, and did so once again today. So a big thanks to our guy Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector of finish for the Southern Conference, the SOCON, and as per usual with these conference previews, I leave them as standalone, so anything that we saw in college basketball on Thursday, I'm going to be polishing that up on the podcast tomorrow because I do want to give these podcasts as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible. I want them to be evergreen, whether you're listening to this in late August, September, October. I want to make sure that you're getting amazing insights. You're going to get set for the greatest college basketball season of all time, so that's why I do it how I do it. And how about if we waste no more time and get into my projector or finish for the SOCON? And number 11, dead last in my projector or finish for the Southern Conference, I have to go with VMI. For VMI, they're actually returning guys from last year as well, like TJ Johnson. He was their top guy with 18 points, 7 rebounds per game. You could just tell that last year, with Ricky Bradley being out, it's just not the same team that they were 2 years ago, where they were actually respectable. 7-11 in the conference. Felt like they were really making some inroads, and even though you're going to be bringing back someone like a Cal Liston, who was relatively solid for the team, AJ Clark, who he was limited a little bit, but 6.5 points, 6 rebounds per game. For one, they just don't necessarily have ideal size for this conference. You've got a few guys like Alexander, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name, begins with a D, Dashvali, I think, who's going to be able to give you a bit of something, but this team was 311th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis last year, 361st in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and team just absolutely got blowtorch on the glass last year. 362nd in terms of rebound percentage in a conference even where you don't have a lot of teams that grab a lot of second and third chances. I really think the struggle is going to be real here for VMI. So in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, the SOCON, at number 11, I go with VMI. At number 10 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I have to go with the Citadel. Now, they bring back some guys from a season ago, but again, they really struggled. 356th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, 281st in terms of points per possession. That said, they are going to be bringing in Edrin Bronson, who was able to average about 5.5 points per game last year at Furman. Should be able to give them a little bit of a shot in the arm. Tyler Muris is a guy that I'm bullish on as well. He was a few years ago over at Idaho, averaging nearly 10 points, 3 rebounds per game. If I'm not mistaken, he spent a year on the bench over at BYU. So, they actually bring in some guys for not having much NIL whatsoever. You're just not going to get that with the Military Institute, but they also bring back a guy that I liked last season as well, in Carter Kingsbury. So, that's going to be a little bit of something for the team. Chase Cormier, I think, has a little bit of upside. Guy that spent some time with Wofford and Iona. He's able to bomb it from 3-point range. So, there's a little bit of upside here with Ed Cronroy's team, and he's doing his level best here with the lack of resources that you've got for the Citadel. They and VMI just always find themselves towards the bottom of this conference, and do think that that's going to be the case here once again for the Citadel. I've got them number 10 in my projector finish for the SOCON. At number 9 in my projector finish for the SOCON, I'm going with UNC Greensboro. UNC Greensboro has a new coach this year, as it is Jared Hask taking over, and if you're asking who he's taking over for, Mike Jones. Who? Mike Jones, great song back in the day. And for Jared Hask, was not a great tenure over at Stanford, was solid over at UAB. We'll see how quickly he's able to get things going, because N.T. Belgian, I really like him. He was really good over at Little Rock a few seasons ago. Solid player over at Illinois, Chicago, UIC last season. And Braxton Sacker, nice double-figure score over at Southeast Missouri State. It's going to be interesting to see how the defense is going to play out for this team, because Hask's teams over at Stanford, they were a little bit cold to say the least. And it's just a eclectic group of guys. Xavier Finch, he was a solid defensive player over at Wagner. I really like RJ Greer as a 3-point shooter, but is a little bit unproven. Only about 3.5 points per game at Davidson while shooting over 40% from 3-point range. And Vernon Collins, he's going to be coming in after he was a little bit banged up last season as well. So you've got a few unknowns here. It's a little bit mix and match. You're going to be a bit undersized. I think Hask can get UNC Greensboro going in the right direction, but for the second straight year, this goes back to the Mike Jones tenure, they lose 99% of their minutes in scoring. So here are number 9 in my projector finish for the SOCON. I'm going with UNC Greensboro. Number 8 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I go with Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech was not a great team out there in the Ohio Valley Conference last year. They were a team that was well outside the top 225 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, what I love is the fact that they bring in Tobin Anderson as their coach. Tobin Anderson was the man that led Fairleigh Dickinson to that upset over Purdue in the NCAA tournament. Man got very much a raw deal when he was over at Iona. I think it's going to take him a year or two to be able to get everything all working for the team, but they do bring in some nice transfers, a lot of them from the northeast part of the country, like Devontae Hackett. I think he's going to be able to hack it, as he was over at Stone Hill last year, averaging 13.5 points per game, and the guy was on a tear with 26.4 points per game in their last 5 games last year. So upside there. You're bringing in Childarian Newton, spent some time over at Grambling and Abilene Christian, was a nice double-figure scorer last season over at Abilene Christian. And then Deontay Green, I really think, is the X factor. A few seasons ago, he was over at South Florida as a 6'10" big man. He was averaging about 4.5 rebounds per game. If I'm not mistaken, spent some time over at Florida State, was really dealing with injury last year. Caleb Hollenbeck is a guy that's able to shoot it from 3. I don't quite know how it's going to all come together, and I think that's going to take Tobin Anderson, like I said, a year or two to really build some inroads for Tennessee Tech, but the arrow is very much trending upward for this program. I've got Tennessee Tech in my projector finish for the Southern Conference here at number 8. At number 7 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I'm going to be going with Mercer. I'm a big stan of what Coach Ritter has been able to do with this program. Now, they do lose quite a bit from a season ago, and they're going to be looking to replace it with a few non-Division I guys. They do bring back Brody Shoulders from a season ago, and that's a good place to shoulder the load, as he was giving the team about 9.5 points, 7 boards, a little bit of a steal per contest. Nice little do-it-all guy. And then Kellen Steele, he's going to be coming on over from Maine. He was averaging about a block, 4.5 rebounds per game, and this team should be solid down low. They did allow a lot of second and third chances on glass, but they themselves were good in terms of being able to grab their own second and third chances, and then they're bringing in a good man, Derek Goodman, about 16 points per game and shot 44% from 3-point range over at Ohio Dominic. They're going to need to clean up some of the home and road splits that they had last year. Last year, they shot over 40% from 3-point range at home. That went down to 31.8% away from home, which in college basketball, you're just going to have some home and road splits, but you'd like it to be a little bit more, shall we say, balanced out there. And then you've got Quentin Perkins, the second. He's going to be back from a season ago. He was a nice contributor for this backcourt, and then I do think that the non-Division I transfer, KJ Lamont is going to be able to help this team out in the backcourt as well. So with regards to my projector finish at number 7, I'm going to be going with Mercer. At number 6 in my projector finish for the SOCON, I'm going with Wofford. Now, Wofford was actually second in the conference last year. Shout out to Kevin Glittner, who really got things turned around last season. He took that job at the last minute. There was a lot of controversy, and yet this Wofford team was still solid. Reason why I dropped them down from where they were last year is not because I think that they get any worse. Now, you do have to replace Niles Melchowski along Kamari Holmes. Those two guys were combining for nearly 37 points per game, so that's a little bit of an issue, but I mean, it's just because I do think that the rest of the conference has gotten a little bit better. They're going to be bringing back Brian Sumter, who was able to average about 6.5 points, right in the neighborhood about 5 rebounds per game. I do think that they're going to be solid on the glass. This was not the most dominant rebounding team by any stretch of the imagination last year. Would like to see them generate more turnovers, and Holmes was that main guy in terms of generating steals, but you've got Chase Watley, who's back from a season ago. He was averaging about 9.5 points per game. You don't necessarily have a lot of your bombers back from three-point range. Luke Flynn was a guy that was shooting about 34% from three-point range, but as we know, Glittner, with him having familiarity with the program, he himself was a good guard. He's going to be able to teach that for a lot of these guys. And additionally, with Wofford, I like the fact that they bring in Chris Arias, who was over at Jacksonville last year. He was a guy that shot in that neighborhood about 36 or so percent from three, 7.5 points per contest over there. And the Virginia Wise transfer, it's very wise to bring in a 7-footer in Evan Ramsey. He was averaging about 1.8 blocks, 7.5 rebounds, 14 points per game. I think this team is going to be solid down low. Take a big step with that backcourt, and a little bit of question mark as to who's going to be bringing the ball up. So in my projector finish for the SOCON at number 6, I'm going to be going with Wofford. At number 5 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I'm going to be putting Chattanooga here. For Chattanooga, they had a lot of injuries last year. It was just a little bit of a discombobulated team in general, but I like the fact that they bring back their top rebounder from a season ago in Tate Darner. He was averaging about 4.5 rebounds, 10 points per game, and this is just a system that I trust in. For Chattanooga, you know that they're going to be bombing it from 3 under Dan Earl. This team always takes over 45% of their field goal attempts from three-point range. Sean Cusano was a guy that was out of the fold last year as well. He was limited to 6 games 2 seasons ago. He was a nice little contributor for that team that was able to make the run in the NIT, so getting him back, that should be able to help him out quite a bit. Additionally, they have Tyler Hauser coming in. 14 points, 5.5 boards, shot 39% from three-point range. Yeah, Nathan Levy as well. He began his career over at UW Green Bay. Actually, even before that, he played professionally at Turkey. He's 6'8". He's able to give you some three-point shooting as well. And then Matt Hampton, he comes over from Three Rivers College of the non-Division I ranks. Guy absolutely tore it up there. 17 points, 5.5 boards, 5 assists. You know that this team is always going to be rough on defense. Last year, 335th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but I do think that they're going to be cleaning things up just a little bit with that regard, and just a little bit of defense, in my opinion, is going to get them back towards the top half of the conference. I've got the Chattanooga Mocs, number 5 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference. At number 4 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I'm going to be going with Western Carolina. With Western Carolina, this team did have their issues on defense, 303rd in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but that said, Tim Kraft is doing a really good job with this program. 2 years ago, they were right there at the bottom of the conference. They got more towards the middle of the conference this past season. They were really good on the glass, and while they do lose a lot of their top scorers like Marcus Kell, Cord Stansberry from the season ago, being able to bring back Samuel Dada, who last year, it's either Data or Dada, I don't know the exact pronunciation, but I know that he gave you 7.6 rebounds per game as a freshman. Additionally, you've got Jaden Roberts coming in, as he was averaging about 4 points per game and was a 41+% three-point shooter. And then Isaiah Manning, who was over at Sam Houston State. This guy began his career at the Power Conference level, if I'm not mistaken, over at TCU. He was averaging 10.5 points, nearly 4 boards. He shot darn near 40% from three-point range last season. So I do think that for Western Carolina, I don't know if they're going to be able to quite climb the mountain and be able to get towards the top of the conference, but I know that Mr. Kraft is doing a really good job in terms of being able to build up this program. They've got a few other interesting transfers that I think are going to be able to come in there, make some nice contributions for this team. Like, I do think that Donovan Redmond, with his 6'10" size, that's going to be able to help out coming over from Old Dominion. So in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I've got Western Carolina here at number 4. Number 3 in my projector finish finish for the Southern Conference, going to be going with East Tennessee State. Now, they are going to be losing a lot of those guys like Blake Barkley and company from a season ago. So for East Tennessee State, it is a team that's in a little bit of transition, but I mean, Brooks Savage always just does such a good job with this team. Probably the most balanced team in the SOCON, as they were a top 100 team in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis last season. Typically in this conference, you only get one or the other, and BJ Ward, who comes on over from Southeast Missouri State, averaged for them about 11 points, shot 35% from three. Perfect fit for this team. Trevor Henning, who is over at Weber State, is a guy that's able to give you 10 points per game. Jaden Cooper, 11 points, a little bit over a CO per contest. He has a chance to be really that takeover guy. You don't necessarily have that one guy on the roster where you can say, oh, this guy's going to be a 15-plus point per game scorer or anything like that, like Tyron Mason, who's going to be coming over from UT Arlington. He's just a rock-solid player. Jordan McCollum, he's a guy that last year, 8.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. I think that he takes a stride forward, but that said, you're able to get Crump with Braden Crump back, 6.5 points per game. It's going to be one of those holes greater than the sum of its parts teams. This was also a team that was really good on the inside, 26th with regards to their 2-point shooting percentage, a top 75 team with regards to their defensive rebound percentage as well. So I think East Tennessee State going to be rock solid down low. I've got them number 3 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference. And number 2 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I'm going to be going with Sam Amford. For Samford, it's the year number 2 under Lenny Acuff. Team was really good at taking care of the ball last year. Top 15 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. What ultimately doomed them was the fact that they didn't generate a lot of turnovers themselves, and they were shooting just 69.2% at the free throw line. I do realize that you lose Jaden Booth, that top scorer from a season ago, but the Norris brothers are back. Cade Norris, who was able to log about 8.5 points, 4.5 boards, 2 assists on 40% three-point shooting, and Keaton Norris, more of the facilitator with nearly 5 assists per game. That's a really good place to start. I think that this team is going to be a bit more solid down low as well, because you bring in Braden McIver, who he was over at Coastal Carolina 2 years ago. He was averaging in that neighborhood about 6.4 rebounds per game. Last year, it was just a big fall off, and he did miss a year due to injury prior to that 2024-25 season. So more like 3 years ago is how you have to go back for his production. But Najimy George, he's had recent production over at New Haven, 11.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. And then Ty Davis, didn't see a lot of minutes over at Creighton, did average a little bit over an assist per game. He's a guy that they can put the ball in his hands. And Dejon Humphrey was shooting about 39% for three-point range as well. So I do think that this is a team that has a lot of upside, a lot of good tools. I think Lenny Acuff is going to get this offense humming, and I do think that the defense is going to be able to take some steps in the right direction as well. In my projector finish here at number 2, I'm going to be going with Sam Amford. And then number 1 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference, I'm going to go with Furman. Now, losing Wilkins to Kentucky, that is going to be a big blow for this team, and no longer do you have Cooper Bowser, but you do have his brother, Cole Bowser, who was averaging about 5 points, 5 boards per contest last year. You're bringing a true 7-footer in Jordan Butler from South Carolina. That'll help hold down the fort down low. This was a team that was 69th, very nice in terms of rebound percentage last year. Sold themselves down a little bit. Wasn't quite the same explosive offense that we've seen in the past. They didn't necessarily have a lot of great three-point shooting, but now you're bringing in Jackson Bell, who over at Army last year was averaging about 12 points, 5 boards, and he was a 36% three-point shooter. They bring in one of the better players in the conference from a season ago as well, in Marcus Kell over at Western Carolina, about 13.5 points per game. I love what he's able to bring to the table. Bija Franklin, hopefully I got that name correct. He's a guy that was able to average about 4.5 points per game for this unit as well last year. So I think it's a very complete team. Again, I don't know if they ever get back to really that super explosive offense that they had when they knocked out Virginia in the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago. But Bob Ritchie is a guy that very much knows what the heck he is doing. Additionally, I think that you've got a little bit of upside with Davis Molnar as well. I think that he could take a stride forward here in his junior season. And I think that Furman, they're a very complete team. They're always really good with their 2-point shooting percentage, top 25 team with that regard last year, and I think that they win the conference. I've got Furman number 1 in my projector finish for the Southern Conference. And that'll wrap things up for the SOCON Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, the email does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. this has been a podcast that has been up and running for over 2,450 straight days without a missed podcast. So you know that's going to be money in the bank, and we still have plenty of conference previews to do. I've been going much more with the smaller conferences because of all the court cases that are lingering. Again, because I did a conference preview today, we saw Jizzle James leave Charlotte. I'll be polishing that up on the podcast tomorrow, and please let me know what you want to hear on this podcast, because I do want to make this the greatest college basketball season of all time. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.